Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 1, Chapter 3. Having dressed, Stepan Arkadyevitch sprinkled himself with cologne, straightened the sleeves of his shirt according to his wont, filled his pockets with cigarettes, portemonnaie, matches, and his watch with its locket and double chain, and shaking out his handkerchief, feeling clean, well-perfumed, healthy, and happy in body, if not in mind, went out to the dining-room where his coffee was already waiting for him, and next the coffee his letters and the papers from the courthouse. He read the letters. One was very disagreeable, from a merchant who was negotiating for the purchase of a forest of his wife's estate. It was necessary to sell this wood, but now there could be nothing done about it until a reconciliation was effected with his wife. Most unpleasant it was to think that his interest in this approaching transaction were complicated with his reconciliation to his wife, and the thought that this interest might be his motive, that his desire for reconciliation with his wife was caused by his desire to sell the forest, this thought worried him. Having finished his letters, Stepan Arkadyevitch took up the papers from the courthouse, rapidly turned over the leaves of 2 deeds, made several notes with a big pencil, and then, pushing them away, took his coffee. While he was drinking it, he opened a morning journal, still damp, and began to read. It was a liberal paper which Stepan Arkadyevitch subscribed to and read. It was not extreme in its views, but advocated those principles which the majority hold, and in spite of the fact that he was not interested in science or art or politics in the true sense of the word, he strongly adhered to the views on all such subjects as the majority, including this paper, advocated. And he changed them only when the majority changed, or more correctly, he did not change them, but they changed themselves imperceptibly. Prince Stepan never chose a line of action or an opinion, but thought and action were alike suggested to him, just as he never chose the shape of a hat or coat, but took those that were fashionable. And for one who lived in the upper 10, through the necessity of some mental activity, it was as indispensable to have views as to have a hat. If there was any reason why he preferred a liberal rather than a conservative direction, which some of his circle followed, it was not that he found a liberal tendency more rational, but that it better suited his mode of life. The liberal party said that everything in Russia was wretched, and the fact was that Stepan Arkadyevitch had a good deal many debts and was decidedly short of money. The liberal party said that marriage was a defunct institution, that it needed to be remodeled. And the fact was that domestic life afforded Stepan Arkadyevitch very little pleasure, and compelled him to lie, and to assume that it was contrary to his nature. The liberal party said, or rather took it for granted, that religion was only a curb on the barbarous portion of the community. And the fact was that Stepan Arkadyevitch could not bear the shortest prayer without pain, and he could not comprehend the necessity of all these awful and high-sounding words about the other world, when it was so very pleasant to live in this. And moreover, Stepan Arkadyevitch, who liked a merry jest, was sometimes fond of scandalizing a quiet man by saying that anyone who is proud of his origin ought not to stop at Rurik and deny his earliest ancestor, the monkey. Thus the liberal side had become a habit with Stepan Arkadyevitch, and he liked his paper, just as he liked his cigar after dinner, because of the slight haziness which it caused his brain. He now read the leading editorial, which explained how in our day a cry is raised without reason over the danger that radicalism may swallow up all the conservative elements, and that government ought to take measures to crush the hydra of revolution, and how, on the contrary, according to our opinion, the danger lies not in this imaginary hydra of revolution, but in the inertia of traditions which block progress, and so on. He read through another article on finance, in which Bentham and Mill were mentioned, and which dropped some sharp hints for the ministry. With his peculiar quickness of comprehension, he appreciated each point, from whom and against whom and on what occasion each was directed, but this, as usual, afforded him some amusement. But his satisfaction was poisoned by the remembrance of Matryona's advice, and by the chaos that reigned in his house. He read also that Count von Bust was reported to have left for Wiesbaden, that there was to be no more gray hair. He read about the sale of a light carriage and the offer of a young person. But these items did not afford him quiet satisfaction and ironical pleasure as ordinarily. Having finished his paper, his second cup of coffee, and a buttered kalach, he stood up, shook the crumbs of the roll from his vest, and, filling his broad chest, smiled joyfully. Not because there was anything extraordinarily pleasant in his mind, but the joyful smile was caused by good digestion. But this joyful smile immediately brought back the memory of everything, and he sank into thought. Two children's voices. Stepan Arkadyevitch recognized the voice of Grisha, the youngest boy, and Tanya, his eldest daughter, were now heard behind the door. They brought something and dropped it. "I tell you, you can't put passengers on top," cried the little girl in English. "Now pick 'em up." "Everything is at 6s and 7s," thought Stepan Arkadyevitch. Now here the children are, running wild. When going to the door, he called to them. They dropped the little box which served them for the railway train and ran to their father. The little girl, her father's favorite, ran in boldly, embraced him, and laughingly clung around his neck, enjoying as usual the odor which exhaled from his whiskers. Then, kissing his face, reddened by his bending position, and beaming with tenderness, the little girl unclasped her hands and wanted to run away again, but her father held her back. "What is Mamma doing?" he asked, caressing his daughter's smooth, soft neck. "How are you?" he added, smiling at the boy who stood saluting him. He acknowledged he had less love for the little boy, yet he tried to be impartial. But the boy felt the difference, and he did not smile back in reply to his father's chilling smile. "Mamma, she's up," answered the little girl. Stepan Arkadyevitch sighed and thought, "It shows that she has spent another sleepless night. What? Is she happy?" The little girl knew that there was trouble between her father and mother, and that her mother could not be happy, and that her father ought to know it, and that he was dissembling when he was asked her so lightly. And she blushed for her father. He instantly perceived it, and also blushed. "I don't know," she said. "She told me not to study, but she told me to go with Miss Hull over to grandmother's." "Well, then, run along." "Tanchuachka moya." "Oh, yes, wait," said he, still detaining her and smoothing her delicate little hand. He took down from the mantelpiece a box of candy that had placed there the day before, and gave her 2 pieces, selecting her favorite, chocolate and vanilla. "For Grisha?" she asked, pointing at the chocolate. "Yes, yes." And still smoothing her soft shoulder, he kissed her on the neck and hair and let her go. "The carriage is at the door," said Matvey, and he added, "A woman is here to ask a favor." "Has she been here long?" demanded Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Half an hour." "How many times have you been told never to keep anyone waiting?" "I had to get your coffee ready," replied Matvey in his kind, rough voice, at which no one could ever take offense. "Well, ask her up instantly," said Prince Stepan with an angry face. The petitioner, the wife of Captain Kellenin, asked some impossible and nonsensical favor, but Prince Stepan, according to his custom, gave her a comfortable seat, listened to her story without interrupting, and gave her the careful advice to whom and how to apply, and in lively and elegant style wrote in his big, scrawling, but handsome and legible hand a note to the person who might be able to aid her. Having dismissed the captain's wife, Stepan Arkadyevitch took his hat and stood for a moment trying to remember whether he had not forgotten something. The result was that he forgot nothing except what he wanted to forget. His wife. Ah, yes. He dropped his head, and a gloomy expression came over his handsome face. To go or not to go, said he to himself. And an inner voice told him that it was not advisable to go, that there was no way out of it except through falsehood, and that to straighten, to smooth out their relations was impossible, because it was impossible to make her attractive and lovable again, or to make him an old insensible to passion. Nothing but falsehood and lying could come of it, and falsehood and lying were opposed to his nature. But it must be done sooner or later. It can't remain so always, he said, striving to gain courage. He straightened himself, took out a cigarette, lighted it, inhaled the smoke 2 or 3 times, blew it into a pearl-lined ashtray, went with quick steps towards the sitting room, and opened the door in his wife's sleeping room.